Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Imagine laws, right? Laws written, maybe not to protect, but, well, sometimes to oppress.
hmm
Laws that maybe they sound okay on paper, but they actually end up undermining the very fairness they're supposed to uphold.
That's pretty much the unsettling picture Elie Mystal paints in his book, Bad Law. 10 popular laws that are ruining America.
Yeah, it's quite the hook.
It definitely is. And genre-wise, we're looking at nonfiction. It's legal analysis, but deeply tied into social commentary.
Right.
Mystal really dissects 10 specific U.S. laws, and there's a constitutional amendment in there, too.
Okay.
And he argues pretty forcefully that they cause real harm socially, politically, and basically they need to be repealed.
So he goes into the history.
Oh, yeah. Deep dives into the historical context of what they intended to do versus, what actually happened.
The consequences.
Exactly. And he often highlights, let's say, the discriminatory roots and the negative impacts that are still playing out today.
You know, what really grabbed me about Bad Law was just Mistal's style. It's so direct, really engaging.
Yeah.
Even when he's tackling some, really complex legal stuff,
Yeah.
he makes it feel accessible.
Yeah.
Get you thinking,
Totally agree. He has a way of cutting through the jargon.
And I also liked how he connected issues that seemed separate,
Yeah.
all through this lens of just bad laws.
It makes the scale of the problem feel huge, but also kind of interconnected.
Right. And it's not just pointing fingers. He does offer some ideas, some actionable thoughts on how we can push for change.
For me, it was that unflinching look at the history. He keeps pointing out how these laws often came from legislatures that, they didn't look much like the country does now.
Good point.
And he really forces you to confront that legacy, how those past decisions are still shaping things.
Okay, but on the flip side, and this isn't a spoiler or anything,
Uh-huh.
with so many problematic laws crammed in, maybe some important things get a bit less attention than they might deserve in, say, a longer book.
That's fair. It's a broad sweep.
And honestly, reading about all this stuff consistently, it can be pretty emotionally taxing. It's infuriating, really.
It definitely can be heavy material, no doubt.
So, all that said, rating-wise, I'd give Bad Law a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
I think that's fair. A strong 4. And so for our deep dive today, we want to get into some of those core arguments, some key examples Mystal uses.
Yeah, let's do that.
The idea is to really show how these bad laws, as he calls them, impact, fundamental parts of American life.
Like what specifically?
Well, we'll definitely touch on voting rights, immigration is a big one, and the criminal justice system.
Okay.
And we'll be drawing straight from his analysis, trying to give everyone a clear picture of the issues he's raising.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Voting rights.
Let's do it. Okay, voting rights. Mystal spends a lot of time on this question of, why isn't everyone just automatically registered to vote?
Yeah, that seems like a basic starting point, doesn't it?
His perspective is pretty forceful on this.
I bet. What does he say?
Basically, he argues every single voter registration law is, and I think I'm quoting here, an anti-democratic anathema.
Wow.
Designed, he says, purely to suppress participation, not to actually ensure fair elections.
So the whole election security argument.
He contends they aren't needed for that, or even to combat voter fraud. He actually points out something kind of counterintuitive.
What's that?
That fraudsters often use the info from voter registration rolls.
Huh. Okay. So if the stated reason isn't the real reason, what is?
Well, that's the question he pushes. And looking at the history is revealing, right?
Where does it start?
He traces it back. The first voter registration law in the U.S. Massachusetts, 1800.
Okay.
And it was explicitly, openly intended to limit voting based on owning property and paying taxes.
Ah. So right from the get-go, it wasn't about fraud.
Nope. It was about controlling who gets to vote, who has access.
Which raises that big question.
Mhm.
How have that impulse, that restriction impulse, kind of evolved over time, even if the reasons given have changed?
Exactly. And it wasn't like everyone adopted it right away.
No.
Mystal notes that, mid-19th century, as immigration picked up, then some states got more interested.
Oh, okay. Like who?
New York, for instance. Their first law, 1840, only applied to New York City.
Just the city? Why?
Widely seen, he says, as a political move by the Whigs, trying to curb the influence of Irish immigrants.
Because they might have trouble registering, practical barriers.
Precisely. So you see this pattern early on, using these laws strategically to keep certain groups away from the polls.
Wow.
And even things that seem neutral now, like residency requirements, they can hit certain groups harder.
How so?
Well, think about a city like New York, lots of renters, right? A 30-day residency rule effectively makes the registration period longer, especially if you're dealing with housing insecurity or you move a lot for work.
Right. Those seemingly small hurdles can add up.
They absolutely create significant barriers. He argues that, okay, the overt property rules are gone, but these kinds of regulations can function in a similar way. They create obstacles for people who are more transient.
And he really pushes back on the idea that registration leads to, like, a better electorate, right? More informed or engaged.
Yeah, dismisses it completely, calls it claptrap.
Mm.
And he draws a direct line from that, thinking back to the justifications used to exclude women, young people, the poor, Black Americans.
So for him, it's not about civic duty.
No, it's about keeping power in the hands of a select few, which forces you to ask, right, who really benefits when not everyone who can vote actually does vote?
Yeah. Good question.
So connecting this all together, Mystal basically calls for just getting rid of all voter registration laws. Full stop.
Just repeal them.
Yeah. As a first step towards a real democracy here, he says we don't need new laws or amendments on this, just remove the ones that suppress turnout.
It's a bold take.
It is, and it makes you think, doesn't it? How does all this history and his analysis challenge how you think about what a truly accessible democracy should look like?
Definitely something to chew on. Okay, where next? Immigration.
Yeah, let's shift to immigration, another huge chunk of bad law.
And I imagine his assessment is pretty direct there, too.
Direct and unflinching is a good way to put it. He
Yeah.
argues the entire immigration system is definitionally racist.
Wow, okay. That's a strong statement.
It is. Created, he says, with the explicit goal of keeping America white and Protestant.
Seriously.
He contends there's no objective, no evidence-based reason for the limits we have now on who can come in, so we invent reasons,
And those reasons are?
almost always rooted in racial bias, according to him. It's challenging, yeah, but he backs it up with a lot of historical digging.
So what does he focus on specifically?
One key thing is the criminalization of immigration. He's careful to separate civil stuff, like overstaying a visa,
Okay.
from actual crimes like illegal entry and illegal reentry.
What's the difference there?
Okay, so illegal entry, crossing the border without permission, that's a misdemeanor.
Right.
But illegal reentry, that's broader. It includes just being in the U.S. after you've been deported or denied admission, and that can carry much, much harsher penalties. Even felony charges.
Just for being found here after being deported.
Exactly. That being found part is crucial. Mystal points out someone could live here for years, build a life, have family, and still be considered a felon just for being present after a deportation order, even if that initial deportation was for something minor, a civil issue.
That seems wildly disproportionate.
He gives this stark example. Someone gets deported, maybe they didn't fully get the legal process right. They come back to their life, their family here, and boom, felony charges. It really makes you question the fairness.
And the history behind these specific laws.
Oh, he goes there. Deeply disturbing roots. He talks about figures like Representative Albert Johnson.
From when?
Back in the 1920s, a known racist, worked closely with a eugenicist named Harry Laughlin.
Eugenics. Seriously.
Yeah. Mystal really underscores this uncomfortable truth. Laughlin's theories about race, about preserving the American racial stock, preventing degradation, those ideas were actually admired and even adopted by Adolf Hitler.
Oh my God. That connection between American immigration policy and eugenics.
It's crucial and deeply unsettling history that Mystal forces us to look at.
And it's hard to confront, but necessary.
Does he talk about how the courts handle this history?
He does. He points out that even when courts see the racist way the illegal reentry law has been applied, like the Ninth Circuit acknowledged, they sometimes still just defer to Congress, basically ignoring the clear racist intent behind the law's creation.
So even when the discriminatory origins are obvious, it's still hard to dismantle the law.
Exactly. Which leads Mystal to advocate for just repeal.
Get rid of the laws criminalizing illegal entry and reentry.
Completely. He talks about the New Way Forward Act proposed by some reps, which aims to do just that, plus ending mandatory detention, family separation.
Right. His argument is powerful. Jailing people for what he calls the crime of existing is fundamentally unjust. It has to stop.
He doesn't think harsher penalties deter people.
He argues that the hope for a better life, which is what drives most immigration, right? That hope will always outweigh the threat of more jail time.
So, thinking about his analysis, that enduring legacy of racism in immigration law, it's stark.
It really makes you consider its ongoing impact.
Okay, last big area for today, the criminal justice system.
Another area where I'm guessing Mystal doesn't hold back, the '94 crime bill.
Bingo. He calls it the poster child for bad criminal justice law in America.
Wow, why?
Argues it played a huge role in the U.S. having such an incredibly high incarceration rate.
Right, mass incarceration.
And worsening the racial disparities within the system. It's a strong indictment, especially since that bill had broad support back then.
What parts of that does he focus on?
He really zeroes in on the 3 strikes and you're out policy.
Yes, I remember that. Mandated severe minimum sentences, life imprisonment, sometimes for 3 convictions of violent felonies or serious drug offenses.
Okay.
But here's the twist Mystal highlights. The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, that law broadened what counts as a strike under another law, the Armed Career Criminal Act, or ACCA.
Broadened it how?
It added serious drug offenses as a qualifying strike.
So it wasn't just violent crimes anymore.
Exactly. It effectively shifted the focus from repeat violent offenders to people convicted of drug offenses, often relatively minor ones.
And that had unforeseen consequences.
Profound ones, especially on racial disparities.
How bad was it?
Mystal pulls ACLU data. Even before that 86 Act, the average federal drug sentence for African Americans was already 11 times longer than for white people.
11 times, okay.
By 1990, just 4 years later, that average sentence was 49 times longer.
49? That's staggering. How could it jump that fast?
It starkly shows the racially biased impact, right?
How?
And Mystal points out this, well, troubling irony.
Was that?
The ACCA, the law that enabled this, championed by people like Arlen Specter, supported by Democrats like Ted Kennedy, Al Gore. It was initially sold as a way to fix prison overcrowding and reduce racial disparities in sentencing.
Reduce them? How?
The logic was take sentencing discretion away from judges, impose mandatory minimums, and you stop lenient sentences for violent criminals. Full treatment, right?
But Mystal says that missed the point.
Fundamentally misunderstood the dynamics, he argues. Because taking power from judges, where did it go?
Prosecutors.
Exactly. It put immense power in the hands of local prosecutors.
Okay.
And Mystal argues that thinking that would solve racism is like his analogy, taking a kid from a bad home and putting them in a den of wolves.
Wow. Because prosecutors can have biases too.
And if they do, he contends, they can inflict way more widespread harm through charging decisions than individual judges could with sentencing variations. It really makes you think about the system differently.
So the result was?
A system, Mystal says, where prosecutors often didn't even need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt for the big charges.
Why not?
Because the fear of those huge mandatory minimums was enough. It coerced defendants, especially from marginalized groups, into pleading guilty to lesser charges.
Even if they were innocent. Or the offense was minor.
Exactly. So he concludes, just tweaking these laws isn't enough.
They need to go.
Complete repeal. Go back to a system where punishment fits the specific crime and judges actually have appropriate discretion.
Yeah. This deep dive really just scratches the surface, doesn't it? Of everything Mystal covers in bad law.
It really does. The book is packed.
Well, if this conversation, this deep dive into bad law, sparked your curiosity and you want to dig deeper into these arguments,
you definitely should.
You can find a link to grab the book on Amazon right there in the description below. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations into the ideas shaping our world.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope this overview of some of Elie Mystal's powerful arguments has maybe given you a new lens to look through.
A new perspective on the laws that govern all of us.
Exactly.
So, what stood out most to you? What was the most surprising or maybe the most thought-provoking point you heard in this deep dive?
We'd love to know.
Share your favorite takeaway down in the comments below. And please, share this with anyone you think might find this discussion valuable.
Your engagement really helps us keep bringing these important conversations to more people.
Thanks again for listening.